Hello again everyone, I'm Jim. Welcome to another video. Now, continuing on from the videos I started doing on enterprise servers for your home lab, for your considerations, I now have two new servers for testing, I suppose, and putting to your consideration. But the main difference being this time is there is one that is a very good viable server for our home lab, and there is one that is time to put out to pasture. Now, before you, there are two servers. These are both Dell servers, they are both 2U, and they are both Dell R7 series, with one big difference. This one is an R710, this one is an R730, which means there are two generations between them. This being an 11th generation server with the 710 being the 11th generation range, and this one being a 13th generation server. Now, as it stands today, we are at the Dell 15th to 16th generation, which are the 750 series, so these servers have some age to them compared to a current new server. But one of these servers is actually still viable, still used in production quite frequently, and is still actually quite a sensible choice if you are looking to start a home lab. The other, unfortunately, is past its sell-by date. So what I'm going to show you, we'll have a look over them, quick run through, quick view of the differences between them, and then I will get them spun up, show you how powerful they are in the configurations I have here, but more importantly is how much power servers like this consume, and the difference in power usage between an 11th gen and a 13th gen, to demonstrate to you why, unfortunately, these servers and any 11th gen server, unfortunately, really do need to be sent away for recycling, I'm afraid. Now, starting with the R710, pop the lid off of it, you will see inside, while I put that down to the side, standard server layout, hard disk at the front. This is a 6-bay chassis. They did this in a 4 and 6 bay versions with 3.5-inch drives. They did an 8-bay version with 2.5-inch drives in the R710. So hard disks, SAS hard disks, SAS backplane, got a battery for the RAID controller here, DVD drive, which is quite standard on this style Dell. Fans, hot swappable fans, again, can be swapped out in production. We've got the air guides over the top of the processors and the memory, and then we've got 2 bays at the back for PCIe risers, which we've got a 4-port network card, Broadcom by the looks of it there, and you could have the same for a SAS controller, etc., tucked in the back. And down underneath we have got the Dell, I think it might be a PERC H700, it might be a 6i SAS RAID controller, and that basically is it, that side. Pair of power supplies in the back left hand corner as well, hot swappable as per the norm. Underneath the shroud we have got a pair of processors and their memory banks. The 11th gen server series used the Xeon 55 and 5600 range of Xeons. They were either dual core, quad core or hex core processors. That was it. No other option was available for these, and DDR3 ECC memory. This server could use up to 288 gigabytes of RAM, but that was the upper limit because basically at the time it was built, that was what it was spec'd to be. This, as I've said, is an 11th gen Dell, and as such it has all the issues associated with servers of that era. So going from the front, we have hard disks. We have a limited amount of chassis available, and the hard disks that can be fitted are of a limited size. Now, depending on which RAID controller is tucked away back here, we'll find out when we boot it up, that will depend on what hard disks can be fitted. If this has the PERC 6i controller in it, which it might well have, then we can only fit 2 terabyte hard disks in the front. If it has the H700, then we can fit 4 terabyte drives in the front, maybe 6, but it's very, very fussy because unfortunately when this was new and when the hardware design was new, that size drive was not available. And I know people have tried putting bigger drives in and it just does all sorts of weird things. You end up with 8TB drives that are detected as 400 gig and all sorts of craziness. So one of the reasons why I say to avoid this style server, and unfortunately it's time for it to retire, are dealing with the frustrations that people like myself had to deal with in production at the time, and now you do not need to. So there should be no need to be dealing with RAID controllers that have got hard disk size limits on them, things like that. Going backwards through here, so obviously the processors under here, again, very much of their time. So dual core, quad core, hex core. This server has effectively 12 cores available to it. With hyper-threading, obviously that does help, but you have 12 cores. Over 2 processors, 2 banks of memory. So you can now get better than that with a single processor and do it for significantly better efficiency. So we'll get onto that later. Obviously at the back here you can see tucked in the bays we've got 2 PCI 8 slots. They're not, obviously they're on a 16 slot riser, but I don't think this generation ever had a GPU option. So again, you can slot a unpowered GPU in here so long as it can run off of a 8-time slot, but you can't fit a 16x one without actually doing some physical alteration and cutting the back out of the slots. Obviously tucked down in here again, there is your perk controller. And the other thing is at the back, this was the generation, this was the era when Dell used to make iDRAC, which is the integrated Dell remote access controller, an optional extra that you actually had to fit as a card, and it used to slot on and fit in there so you could actually have a dedicated port. It was not optioned on this server. So what I'll do, let's get it fired up and we'll do a quick run through of it fired up. Now, before I've even turned the server on, this server at idle with nothing happening consumes 13 watts. So that is what a R710 uses before you even turn the power on the front of the server. That is what the actual motherboard and baseboard management, so iDRAC, are consuming already. Now, we're all booted up. Obviously, as you can see, this is running Windows Server. This server is running Windows Server 2019. When I show you the R730 in a minute, that will be running Windows Server 2022. Again, the reason being is this being a 11th gen server, it does not support anything newer than officially Windows Server 2012, 2016 at a push. But Windows Server 2019 is the newest version I can get on without having to go through and deal with unsupported drivers, anything crazy like that. So that is one difference between the two. The servers are set, both of them are set to use the operating system to do the power management. And just so you can see, this server is not really up to a huge amount at the moment. I think it might be doing some Windows updates. Let's just double check. Not really. It's doing some checking. But it's fairly, as such, idle. We're using 7% of the processor. And while it's fairly idle, we are consuming 183, 186 watts of power. And that's with this server not doing much. So that is an idle server. So this is using nearly 200 watts just to stay on. Now, being in OS power mode, again, you can see the CPU speed is speed stepping up and down correctly. This being a 5520 is a, what we got, 8 cores, 16 threads. So that's 2 4-core processors with hyper-threading in this server. And we've got 64 gig of RAM in it. And even with it not doing much, the fans are fluctuating a little bit. There's not a lot going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to run Cinebench on it. Now, I've not run Cinebench on this one yet. as I've literally only just copied it on. So we will see what we get with Cinebench and how much power this server consumes running Cinebench flat out. Now, the reason I'm going to run Cinebench on this and run Cinebench on the other one is because it's a very easy way to get a full CPU load on a device, and the point score at the end we can compare against the wattage being used, and that will give you a rough calculation of how many points per watts, which gives you an indication of performance per wattage. So how much efficiency you're getting, how much power you're getting per watt. The other thing is obviously as well is I'm sure some people will bring up the fact that one of the big things about servers is, especially when you're dealing with virtualization, you want core count nowadays, because whilst you can stack a physical to virtual ratio quite high if you're in a test lab, if you keep that count quite low, you'll get better performance out of your VMs. And because obviously a more modern processor has the ability to have more cores in it, and obviously we're going to get something with a lot more cores in it, then you can get a much better and much lower physical to virtual core count. So that is where we are. And so without further ado, let's get Cinebench up and running. As I said, I haven't run this yet. While we wait for that to load, the other issue with particularly any of the 11th gen, I'm running on one power supply as well, just because I'll run the other one on one as well. There we go, there's Cinebench up and running. So we're going to accept that. And we are going to turn on advanced benchmark, and we're going to have a minimum test off. And we are going to do a multi-core benchmark, and away we go. So what we should see on here is, while it gets ready, there you go, processor ramping up. So that's all 8 cores and 16 threads under full load. And at full load, with this configuration, we are consuming 274 watts. So that is this server flat out. Now, while we wait for that to finish processing, because although this isn't the sort of thing you'd find in a business world, it's a very good way, as you can see, to load up a system. So it is doing so now. Now, one of the other issues, and it doesn't just apply to the 11th gen servers, it applies to anything of an era similar to this in IT. The iDRAC in this is iDRAC 6, so the remote diagnostic and the remote access to this server, being iDRAC version 6, requires Java, and it requires a version of Java that is so out of date and so insecure that I would never recommend anyone install it on anything. And yes, people have found ways around that by putting it into a Docker container and allowing you to connect through to there. But you shouldn't need to be doing that if you want to look at this sort of kit now, because in the real world, in production, you wouldn't be doing that because it would not be secure. You would not be wanting insecure servers like this in a production environment. So again, there are reasons why the 12th gen came about and was a big step forward for these servers. As I showed you in my review for the R620, that was a big jump forward over the 11th gen. The 13th gen, again, is an improvement upon that. So let's quickly go back. We're still flat out. We're still consuming 276 watts. 277, because the fans are starting to step up. There we go, we finished. Let's see what our score is. So we have scored 3,803 points. And let's see where that puts us in the grand scheme of things. Going down. Oh no, I've got to scroll. There we go. So this server is about equivalent in terms of processing power with 2 processors to a 4th gen Core i7 mobile CPU. You can see up here we've got an i7 7700K that scores nearly sort of, what's that, just under half? Well, sort of. Again, yeah, just so, yeah, sorry, not under half. It scores under double, but a good percentage up. And then we've got a 12 core, 24 thread Xeon V2, which is the same generation that the 12th gen servers uses, scoring more than double just with 1 processor alone in terms of performance. So there you go. That is an R710 and its performance. I'm going to stop it there because, to be honest, there's not much more I can show you on this server because the limitations of what it can do are just not worth me running it. It's unfortunately just too old. There are people out there still asking premium money for these. Do not pay the money. It's not worth you wasting money on an 11th gen now. Move on. The price of the 12th gen, and in fact recently here in the UK the price of 13th gen servers has plummeted, and they are now basically the most viable option if you want to go and look at enterprise servers in your lab and you're looking for something like this. Go for 13th gen now because the price is actually very cost effective, and you will not have to deal with hard disk limitations, driver limitations, limitations in terms of performance and what you can fit inside them. So let me switch to the R730. This is the R730. There is not a great deal that differentiates these visually from an R710. But one of the big differences with the chassis is that on the front you can have up to 16 2.5-inch bays or 8 3.5-inch bays on the R730. On the R730 XD chassis you can have 24 bays along the front, or potentially I believe 28, because I think there's the possibility you can get some in the back. Might be wrong on that one, can't remember. But let's pop the lid. So lid off, and obviously inside it's a very similar setup. Drive bays at the front here. This is the smaller chassis, so we've got the smaller drive bays at the front. Fans, again, all exactly the same, hot swappable, so that you can change them in production. We have got, in this particular one, there, the fan or air guides covering 2 processors. These are Intel Xeon E5 V4 and V3 Haswell EP processors, which can be up to 22 cores per processor, giving you 88 threads potentially in this chassis. Memory I will add in a minute. I had to rob it for something else. Forgot I took it out, but I will put it back in. Standard dual PSU at the back. We have got a daughter board here, which is the internal network cards, and we have 2 full-length bays that can have GPUs fitted. Now, the R730 was also badged up by Dell as a Precision R730 from memory, which is a R730 workstation, which means it's exactly the same inside, apart from the fact that it says Dell Precision instead of Dell PowerEdge. If I can get hold of one of them, I will show you. But this is the basics of the layout. We've got battery there for our onboard perk RAID controller. This again can deal with pretty much any size hard disk because it's modern enough. It has iDRAC 7 on board, which includes a dedicated port, and this one actually has a couple of additional network card ports installed. We've got a lot more options on the motherboard for expansion ports and for options, including we've got the GPU power header down here. We've got power headers here for boosting PCIe. This supports PCIe storage as well. So there are a lot more features that are more modern and more relevant already in here. So not much else to see. It's a lot more sparse in here because obviously everything is designed to be modular compared to the older systems. You can swap out the daughter boards. This has a 4-port gigabit card in a moment. You can put a dual port 10 gig SFP plus card and gigabit Ethernet card in there. I would recommend, if you ever look at these, make sure you look for the chassis that have got Intel cards. Broadcom network cards. If you speak to anyone, unfortunately this one does have one in it, and that I think is a Broadcom. Broadcom were effectively the free ones. Anyone who upgraded these to Intel was actually being very, very sensible, because the Broadcom network card drivers have always historically caused problems. Doesn't matter what operating system you use, Intel network cards do just work. We've got on the right hand side here a little half height area. This one didn't have the riser purchased for it, but you can get a little half height riser that slots in there. Perk controller is upgradable as ever, so you can get the basically a controller with more cache should you require it. But this is the inside of an R730. Let me stick some memory in it and get it fired up. Now, like before, let's just press all the buttons so people can see it. Without powering this server up, this server sits and idles with just the baseboard management at 10 watts, which obviously is already less than an R710, but that's a given. Right, and now we're all booted up. We have got server 2019 loaded on this one. I reloaded it just freshly, just to make sure there was no differences in the operating system compared to the R710. We have got 2 CPUs, we have got 16 cores, which means they are 8-core processors each, and we have 32 threads. And again, I have got the OS managing the power, so you can see at the moment the speed stepping is kicked in. And the grand reveal at idle, which there's not much going on this server at the moment. 60-ish watts. So 100 watts less power at idle, doing nothing. Which, again, to some people they will say, well, it's not a lot for a server. But work that out 24/7, 365. And you will soon see why the generational jumps soon add up. Now, this being here, obviously a 13th gen server, the 12th gen server, so an R720, is about 14-ish% less efficient than this generation of server. And this being a V3 Xeon E5 series, the V4 series is more efficient again, so even on idle it would use a little bit less power again. But obviously, let's see what it uses flat out so we can get a performance mark from the two of them. Again, first fire up, not fired up Cinebench on this machine yet, so I have no idea what it does. The other thing noticeable, at idle, this system is even quieter than the R710, but the fan response on this compared to the R710 is significantly faster. So, again, not using as much power, but let's hit the magic accept button now. As you can see, we know that the basically we're looking to be above this area here. So let's just turn on advanced benchmarking, make sure that's on there, and we'll kick this off and we'll flick back over and watch as all the processor cores slowly start to wind up. Here we go. So we're at 100% utilization with a speed of 2.6 gigahertz, which obviously isn't massive, but that's over 16 cores, 32 threads. And we are using 224 watts. So we're at full load. We're using less power at full load with more CPU cores, more threads, and it's visually apparent already that this is going to take nowhere near as long to run, as you can see. While it is running, the other things as well are obviously, again, all the improvements. So iDRAC version 7, big improvement on these. Being able to leverage more modern technology, bigger hard disks. If you wanted this server and you went for the 3.5-inch drive caddies, you can fit 12, 14, 18 terabyte, 22 terabyte drives in these chassis, and they will work. So there we go, and we're done. And let's see what our result is. Well, there you go. 12,156 points. So we are up above. There's the Xeon that we looked at last time that was about twice as powerful as an R710. We are, again, almost sort of a third on from that. So we are 3, 6, 9. So 3.5 times as powerful. For less power, we get more processing ability, more cores available, and a better overall experience. And this is why I would recommend that if you are looking at these sorts of servers, that you don't just jump on people selling the older generations, the 11th generation servers, anything like that, whether you're looking at R710s, 610s, 410s, they are not worth investing money in. The 13th gen now, these are starting to come out of data centers. They are coming out of data centers and being disposed of at reasonable cost. These are more modern, more efficient, and will give you a better experience of what dealing with these things are like. Not only that, if you've got R710s, these are an easy upgrade. They fit on the same rails. So that is a general quick performance. I will throw up on the screen the equivalent comparison of basically points per watt, or how many Cinebench points per watt you get with an R710 and an R730. And that hopefully will instruct you. If you are running 710s and you're looking to upgrade, again, prime upgrade. If you are looking for something sensible, cost effective, these have only just dropped off of Dell's platform for actual production support. So you can leverage these in a home lab really, really easy. They are very, very capable still. If you can go up to a 14th gen, they are a lot more expensive because they're still in production. But these do make a very good, very cost-effective and very noiseless system. Save some more money, save money in the long run. The money you will burn running an R710's power, if you work it out, I'll try and do some calculations on the screen of what an R710 costs to run for a month and an R730 costs to run just at idle for a month, and you will soon see that it will add up, and this will well and truly be worth it over that. Now, I know this hasn't been the most in-depth video on that. It's more a comparison to say, look, if you are running older kit, there is a very good reason why it's worth maybe considering scrapping it. It's just so much easier now. Running things on older kit, unfortunately, you are dealing with problems, especially if you're running older kit in production. If you're running something that old that hasn't been patched, I mean, the last patches for the 11th gen are probably 2018, if not before. You are dealing with all sorts of risks, all sorts of problems. And you're not only that, you are limiting what you can do when you get a problem, because that's where the issues really do rack up. Anyway, as ever, any questions, anything you'd like me to look at, anything that you want to ask about this, stick a question, stick a comment down below. Come and find me elsewhere. I'm on pretty much the normal social media platforms as myself, and you will find me there. Please feel free to like, subscribe, etc. And hopefully I will catch you in the next video.